Hey, how's it going, guys? It's me, SR Roy from Mistwood Publishing, and today, well, it's been a while, probably, since many of you have seen me. That is because, as if you can't tell, I have moved locations, although I haven't moved towns this time. I've moved locations. Part of why there's been such a long period of time of really very little communication is because the place I lived before this didn't really have a space to really make the YouTube videos a possibility in any good sense. Maybe some of you saw that in some of my Batman videos. You can kind of see where I was, and then I did some videos in my work office, like where I'm employed, because the situation just wasn't ideal. But so this is kind of the new situation, which is much more convenient, even compared to where I lived in Kentucky, because I'm so far separated from where my kids sleep. I can actually talk at a normal volume, and it's not really an issue. But today I wanted to cover, I was editing my book, and I just had an idea for maybe a topic that would be kind of useful for some people, and that is, an easy and quick way to make the editing process a lot easier for yourself. Really, after you've probably, like during your second book, this would probably be the most useful. Your first book, you're kind of using to kind of acquire the assets that I use for this method to make your life easier. So this is mainly for if you're looking to write more than one book. Now, if you're just now checking in with me, Mistwood Publishing, I do write. This is my book here, The Veil of Stars, at mistwoodpublishing.com. I know the lighting's not great in here. I have a plan to fix that. I had a buddy send me some. He's like, yeah, most YouTubers, they have like these lights that shine in their faces that makes it more pleasant to look at. And I'm like, oh, well, that's nice. So I'm looking into that. It's something on my list. But anyway, I write books, so I'm not just blowing steam out of nowhere, This is coming from legitimate, experience from someone who didn't go through a traditional publisher. What I do to make my life a lot easier, especially on the second, third, whatever book, is whenever you get feedback from an editor, whenever you have the document back and you're going through the corrections that they make, a lot of times an editor will point out, after they've corrected the same mistake multiple times, they will make a note of, you just need to, you make this mistake a lot. I'm going to try to catch it as many times as I can, but, maybe you should keep an eye out on it, right? And so whenever I get feedback like that, or I notice that I spell something wrong, or, I tend to have a certain kind of typo, or whatever the case is, I will write it down on a document, usually on my phone because it's right there. And I actually have two different ones. My first document was actually pretty short, but the second one is pretty long, and now it just keeps growing more and more as I notice certain mistakes. And some mistakes that you make aren't going to be possible to do this with because, as you'll see, some words appear so frequently in a document that it's not realistic to expect that you would be able to do that. And I'll illustrate what I mean there in a second. But yeah, so I'm going to go through some of these common things that I mess up with to show you how much one of these little documents can help save you time and energy. So I just have it on my Notepad app. It's called Word Search, even though it's not a literal word search. It is words that I search for in the document because I've noticed that I make these mistakes commonly. So here we have Saga 2, Part 2, which is currently the part of the story that I'm working on in my next book, the sequel to the book I just showed you. And so I just went through and did this. That's what gave me the idea that maybe this would be a helpful video for some people. I don't know. It is YouTube after all. You can find videos about anything. So sometimes it's just something that you spell incorrectly. So I would just search for the way that I spell it wrong and make sure that there are no matches so that I don't have to depend on me just finding it while I'm reading it. And because I have all these common mistakes on my phone, I can be confident that I'm not going to make those mistakes again because I can just search for them, right? And I write them down because they're mistakes that I make a lot without even realizing it. You should not think or be so arrogant to believe that you're just not going to make those mistakes because you know those rules. Typos happen. Some of these things on my list I know how to spell, but it's just typos. You know how you make typos when you make a social media post? The same thing happens when you're writing really, really long stories. So let's be humble and admit that sometimes we make silly mistakes. So another thing you might use it for is some people, might spell firstborn as 2 words. Some people might do it as, with a hyphen there. But me, I chose to do it this way because that's the way I wanted it to be. I also think it might technically be the correct way to do it. As well, it is, I want to be consistent. So because that's a decision that I made to always spell it that way, I want to make sure that it's always spelled that way in my book because consistency matters. So I will control search that word on each of the parts, this is 2 of 4, of this book to make sure that I'm consistent with that. Alright, so something else that I often make a mistake is wanes instead of wanes, right? It's these silly little mistakes. Shuttered with T's instead of D's, that's a mistake I would commonly make. I kept spelling prophecies with an S when it's actually with a C. Yeah. And then both of these are words, hollowed and hollowed, but they have very different meanings, right? It's hollowed sockets, because it's hollow inside like a log, instead of hallowed, which is like almost like hallowed ground, it's holy. Waste, as in your physical waste, and waste, as in you've wasted my time, or this is garbage, that's commonly mistaken and you don't even realize it. Something that I made a big mistake with in the other one was the word Arctic, because the previous book took place in a northern climate. Now, obviously, and this is why some words aren't going to be possible, you can see that it shows up in the word, particularly. So you just kind of come through and see, if it ever pops up not inside of another word, you just kind of look through it. So that's why maybe some words, like when I do dwarves saying them, they're just like M. So if I were to do that, it comes up over 1,000 times because words like demise, so it's things like things like that I can't check because it just wouldn't even be worth the tediousness of it. I check a few things like ankle deep, right? Because I've decided that every time I use that word, I'm going to use a little dash there, and so I want to be consistent. And I do the same thing with like knee deep, many-toothed, crimson bearded, a few other things. Next, I look at shine with 2 N's, shined and shining, because it's not the correct way to spell it. This one probably doesn't come up a lot for people that aren't in fantasy, but deposed is like when you kick a king off of the throne, and dispose is when you throw garbage away. So that's something that I kept getting wrong So I, go through and I make sure that I'm using it correctly. A big one for me was creator, like God, but I kept spelling it with an E instead of an O. Now, whenever creator's used in the something else I look up creator for, with the correct spelling, is whenever I'm referring to God as almost, referring to him directly, like he said this. But if I'm talking about God, I'm going to capitalize H because it's the God, not a monotheistic God. So if I'm talking about the Creator, I capitalize the C. So I want to make sure I'm consistent there too. I kept spelling plated with 2 T's, so I checked that. This is a big one here. If you're someone that has a lot of action in their stories, you might probably use the word somersault and then be surprised to realize that it's not spelt like summer and salt. It's actually a very weird spelling. It's spelt like that, which was a very big surprise to me. I had no idea it was spelt any way different. And a lot of these on this list are things that Microsoft Word does not catch for whatever reason. So next, blood flow is 2 words. So here, blood flowed, that makes sense. But blood flow, as in somebody's blood flow, is 1 word. So that's another thing that comes up again, are things that seem like 2 words but are actually 1 word. And this is one thing that actually came up while I was doing this. Like, I know how to spell wintry. But, it's just a typo in my head. The way you say wintry sounds like there would be an E there, so it isn't. But it's actually just, like that. So I actually did have to correct that here. I actually also had to correct a somersault again on here. Another is pair versus pair. P-A-R-E is almost never used, and paired with that spelling is a very specific sort of thing that you're probably never going to use. So most of the time, you want to make sure that it's always spelled P-A-I-R, which is a common typo mistake. It's not that we don't know how to spell pair, it's just a typo mistake. Now this is a big one, bare. So like bare as in you're bare, like naked, or you're baring your teeth, B-A-R-E, is commonly confused while in the midst of just typing furiously with bear as in the animal, beard, or to bear arms, right? You're going to use the B-E-A-R variation a lot more if you're me because of all of the combat, right? So like Narbad, took out his axes, he bared them, right? To bear arms kind of thing, calling his axes to bear, right? So I use that word a lot, so I have to look at that. Another thing that comes up for me, but probably not a lot of people, is death throes versus death throws, because that's something that most people probably wouldn't know, that there's a different way of spelling it, and that this here is the correct way of spelling it. So another thing I kept doing was arrows sizzling, almost like bacon, instead of whizzing past, right? So I like to double check that. Now, another reason why this can be important is, you may not realize this, but there are certain words that are acceptable spelling in America and acceptable spelling in the United States. One of these is judgment. Judgment in America does not have this first E. So I've decided that I'm going to go with the American spelling of the word. Especially since that word is in the title of the book, I want to make sure that I'm spelling it consistently throughout the whole story. And so that's what I did. And that's why I searched for it. So yeah, it's a very important thing to do. You want to make sure that you're being consistent with it. let's see. Another thing that's American is whenever you use toward, you don't want to do towards. Towards is not an English way of doing it. So whenever you're like, he stood and walked toward the door, that's the American way of doing it. If you're in England or something, you might say towards. And I've decided, since I'm in America, I'm going to go with that. However, that doesn't mean you're locked into your country's customs. For example, in America, we spell gray with an A, but I like the way it looks with the E. So throughout all my books, I always spell gray with an E, because that's the way I want to do it. And I like to be edgy sometimes, I guess. A little bit of rebellion in there in the totally lamest way possible. So another thing that can be a mistake is when you use the wrong combination of words. So something I was doing commonly was doing different from or differently from. When in English, American English, we want to do differently than. So I have to go through and change all my differently froms to differently thans, because that's something that my editors, multiple editors, were pointing out. So I was like, I didn't even know that was a rule. So definitely, there's so many of these things that I didn't know about that editors pointed out. Next is tomb versus tome, right? So a tome is a book. A tomb is where dead people are. And I didn't realize there were different ways of spelling it until an editor pointed it out, because I guess I just didn't pay attention very well. Some really big common mistake ones coming up here. Next is mute, right? Someone who can't talk versus moot. The point is moot, right? That's a common typo mistake. Huge one if you're dealing with anything with horses and war is cavalry is with the horses. And you can tell because it has vowel in it. If it has vowel in it, okay, I got it right. Now, the common misspelling is Calvary. Calvary, as in Jesus Christ, Calvary, right? And you might even misspell it, so you want to check that too. So that's a common mistake that I know how to spell it, but I have to think about it. And when I'm typing fast, I make the mistake. So I usually catch that a couple times in a book too. Next, you really want to look for, again, words that are commonly typoed, right? So sense, as in a practical sense, right? A profound sense, your senses, can commonly be confused when you're in the heat of typing with sense, as in, since I came back, you've been kind of a butt, right? So that takes a little bit more time because these words come up a lot, but I do take the time to make sure that each one is used properly, because it's embarrassing when it's not. Something I kept misspelling was courtesy. I kept spelling it like this. So yeah. Another one that I kept misusing was verses versus verses. Right, so verses in a biblical sense has an E. Verses in terms of rivalry has a U. And that's something that I think probably a lot of people might mess up. So something I kept messing up was spurted, because blood spurts and stuff. I kept saying spurted with an I. So you'll notice that these incorrect ways of doing it are no longer on my document because I've gone through and fixed it. Next, I just make sure that I'm spelling borders correctly. All right. Reveled. I want to make sure that that's being spelled correctly. Gauge. Should vary in a fantasy book, should almost never show up unless all of these are engage. Because when you're talking about I'm trying to gauge someone's opinion, you spell it with a U. I kept spelling regretted. I don't know why I spelt it this way, and I just want to make sure that I get any variations. Straightened, kept doing that wrong. Kept doing it like that. When in reality, it should be that. And marry, as in we're getting married. I want to make sure that you're using that word properly. And then merry, as in we're having a merry time. Weary. Weary meaning I'm tired, and wary meaning I suspect something is going to happen right now. And so that's an example of some of the things on my list that I look for in this way. And what this does for you and your editors is if you're catching these mistakes, then, let's say you made those mistakes in book 1. Your editor pointed them out, and so bada bing, bada boom, now you have your list. In your second book, you go through and you look for each of those and you fix it. So then you give your second book, to the same editor. Now they no longer have to waste all that time looking for the same mistakes. And so their time and energy is spent finding other mistakes because they are there. You should never publish a book or send a manuscript into a publisher that has not been, pored over by yourself and maybe a few trusted friends. And make sure that your friends know grammar too, because I've made that mistake before. And so, yeah, don't think that you're immune to I don't make mistakes. Oh, we all do. And I'm always learning. I'm always learning to be better. Something that I didn't know was a rule in writing, because I guess my college creative writing professor just failed this miserably, is that you're really not supposed to use adverbs in dialogue especially. So when someone's like said absently, you're not supposed to have absently in there. It's much better to somehow communicate that it's absently through the dialogue itself or the leading up actions of the character before they say it. So I didn't know that when I wrote my first book, but now I do, and so now I'm going through editing Saga 2 with that in mind. And I also didn't know that you really should use said and asked almost exclusively. Again, I was taught the opposite, but I've listened to a lot of publishers and published authors, and they all say, no, that's not right. And so I've been going through and I've been making those changes. I've been getting rid of, I don't get rid of all of them because I still want it to sound like me and my favorite author other than Tolkien, Ari Salvatore. He doesn't say said every time either, but mostly I'm going through and I'm really asking myself the whole adverb thing, as well as, is there a way to make sure that the reader knows this person is talking so that I don't have to say they said at all? It can just be the dialogue. Or have I already written it in a way where the reader obviously knows who's talking, and I'm just using it to say how they're saying it, Because sometimes I'll write this dialogue and it's like, well, we obviously know who's talking. You're just using the dialogue tag to say that they said it passionately. But it's much better to communicate that they said it passionately through the words they say or describing their mannerisms or facial expressions and things like that. So I'm always learning, always trying to be better. Hopefully this video is helpful for you. Editing is, I know, probably, at least for me, the most stressful part of the process other than marketing. And so hopefully this has been helpful for you. Please look out for more Mistwood videos coming up. I do plan on, again, getting some lights so that I don't look like Harvey Two-Face here. But as well, we have a book club coming up in September. Starting in very early September, we're doing a book club for The Veil of Stars. And the great thing about it is you don't even have to own the book to watch the videos. Let's say you read The Veil of Stars and you want a refresher because there's going to be a huge announcement coming at the end of the book club. I'm sure you can figure out what it is. You're not, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what the big announcement might be, because we're doing the book club for a reason, to refresh your mind for a certain purpose. Okay, so it shouldn't be too hard to figure out. So maybe you've read The Veil of Stars and you want a refresher. Maybe you just want to hear the inside scoop on each chapter, because I'm going to be talking about what I was thinking about, what certain things mean without spoiling things, and just kind of giving a kind of a director commentary on the book itself. Maybe you bought the book because you thought it looked pretty and you have no intention of reading it, and so you want to know what the story is, though. You can watch the videos, one per week. I'm going to try to keep them to like 15 minutes, unlike this video. And or you could be like, you know what, I haven't read it yet, but this, maybe I'll read it now because there's going to be this commentary on it and I can get extra information from the author himself on what things mean, because maybe I typically feel lost during a fantasy book. And so I think it's a great idea. Maybe nobody will watch it, but I'm hoping people watch it. I'm hoping to have the setup fully set up, and so that I have lights and everything is set up nicely and the microphone's plugged in, everything is good, so hopefully everything works out. That's kind of what I have cooking on terms of the Mistwood YouTube channel. The website still have deals up from, I think, the spring, but you know what, they're still great deals, so it's okay. But anyway, have a lovely week or day or whenever it is that I make the next video. I do know there will be another video around September, early September, maybe even some videos leading up to the book club just to advertise a little bit more. But have a good day, and peace out.